Welcome to Diva Wargames. I'm Patrick, and I am sick of seeing Space Marines getting gunned down by lasguns. So I'm leaning into my inner transhuman dread by making an army of astartes using Custodes datasheets. 24 of the Imperium's greatest heroes, individually kitbashed and painted, drawn from the 24 coolest chapters that the galaxy has to offer. Alrighty then, with 2 Marines down, today marks the halfway point to the first squad being completed. We'll be picking out another of Dorn's sons today, and probably the least well-known chapter in the squad, an Excoriator. Researching these lads was a bit harder than normal, as there's just not all that much information out there for the chapter. That said, they make up one of 20 Space Marine chapters created during the Second Founding that are listed in the Mythos Angelica Mortis, the Astartes Praeses. These chapters were created specifically to watch over the Eye of Terror, and since then the Excoriators have deployed to a number of important warfronts, including the War of the Beast, battling the Holocaust on Syrtis Minor, and fielding 8 full companies against Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. The chapter was initially built out of veterans of the Siege of Terror. The Imperial fists atop the palace walls that would go on to become the first Excoriators were issued by their Primarch Dorn with a single directive: do not lose. Fellow veterans of Halo ODST will understand the feeling. That aside, this order has gone on to inform how the chapter fights to this day, with survival to fight again another day and never giving an inch of ground being defining features of their chapter culture. The Excoriators are also the first chapter we've talked about with a significant flaw in their gene seed that expresses itself similarly to how the Red Thirst does in many Blood Angel related chapters, but with quite a bit less cannibalism. This flaw, known as the Darkness, are we sure these guys aren't Raven card successors? Manifests as an extended period of listlessness in the Sufferer. While they're in that state, they live out the moment that their Primarch Dorn discovered that his brother Sanguinius had been slain by the Warmaster Horus, and his father, the Emperor, had been mortally wounded. They experience that moment of wrenching loss over and over again, picking up the body of the Emperor and carrying it to be interred in the Golden Throne forever. Naturally, afflicted Excoriators are rarely invited when the Space Wolves throw a house party. The Darkness is usually fixable and is treated by their chaplains. This, additionally, may mark the only time in history when Space Marines have gone to therapy. The Excoriators' attitude towards survival manifests in their culture through their honouring of their wounds and the damage that their war gear sustains during battle. Each scar, scratch and dent is evidence that they held the line, and testament to the fact that they didn't lose following Dorn's command to them given during the Siege of Terror. To express this, Excoriators only repair their war gear to the point of functionality, leaving scratches and dents right where they are. They even annotate them with the foe and the weapon that inflicted the injury. This is a motif that I'll be paying close attention to for today's project. Heading into Blender, I'll start by adding a relatively plain body with no chest aquila. I want to emphasise the chips and scratches on his armour, so starting clean seems like a really good way to go. I'm also paying really close attention to scale here, as the Celestial Lion that I made last week came out a little on the short side. Not fixing what ain't broke, I add my favourite backpack and get it to scale and placed on his back. You can't improve on perfection. Custodian Warden squads have a piece of war gear called a Vexilia. It's a sort of Roman banner, and it increases the objective control of the squad. I've decided that the squad standard will be carried by this chap, and I'll be representing it with this cool Inquisition themed flag. I'll just snip this Age of Sigmar looking brazier off and replace it with something else, a little bit more fitting in a little bit. Looking at weapons now, I want the pose to be that classic banner in one hand, bolt gun being fired one-handed in the other vibe. I must admit to being a touch bamboozled by these arms initially, but I figured it out eventually and slid the arm into place along with the bolt gun. Once I've fine-tuned the pose a little bit, I'll go on to pick out an arm to hold the flag. Once again, this required a little bit of fine-tuning to make the pose look natural, but still dynamic. It's important for the composition of minis like this, particularly with blowing fabric and things, that everything's sort of lined up. So I wanted the flag to be blowing in the same plane that the bolt gun's being held in, if that makes sense. The great thing about this kit is that the hand comes separate, so I can print it out on its own later and dial in the pose by hand in the real world. I picked out the plainest looking helmet from my 5th edition Space Marine kit and put it in place with a very slight upwards tilt. While I was there, I decided that the classic mid-hammer bolt gun from the same kit would look better than the one I'd put on there before, so I scaled it up and slotted it into place instead. The lower cannons on this suit of armour made posing the wrist without the bolt gun visibly clipping into the trim quite challenging, but we got there in the end with some very careful rotation. There we are. Now that's all done, sticking with the relatively unadorned theme, I picked out a plain pauldron and slotted it onto his shoulder. Given that I was already twisting this shoulder way more than the kit intended, this was tricky to get looking natural without anything on the sculpt to guide me, but nothing a little bit of pose tuning can't handle. Speaking of, before I move on to adding things to the waist, I'll take a moment to make sure I'm happy with the way the torso joins onto the legs. Adding a melee weapon, I went with a big, blocky, industrial-looking chainsword. I'm already bringing it back to basics with a lot of the rest of this build, so I figured it'd be cool just to equip this Marine with that most 40k of all weapons. After I've attached it to hooks just below his breastplate, I'll move on to adding some pouches. I don't really like the way that the hips are sculpted with this kit. They're a bit too narrow when compared to some of the other bodies on my hard drive. So I'll cover it up with extras and accessories. I'll cover up the front a little bit later as well with a green stuff loincloth. Putting the final touches onto the banner, I'll replace that gaudy brazier with an Imperial Fist emblem, as all the Marines in this squad are drawn from Imperial Fist successor chapters. Doubling it up so it's not flat on the back, I'll just slot it onto the top of the banner. And there we have it, one Excoriator standard bearer ready to print. On to the real world half of the modelling. Right, now he's real, I've removed the flagpole in order to replace it with a brass rod. Resin just doesn't do long, thin objects well. It'll snap as soon as I look at it funny. Making the loincloth now, I used 100% green stuff rather than mixing in any milliput, as I need it to be stretchy in order to get it to tear well, which will make it look nice and ragged when it's done. The first step is to roll out a nice, thin sheet. Lots of people use Vaseline or oil to stop green stuff sticking to things, but I find water works almost as well and doesn't leave me feeling like a second-rate masseur afterwards. Next is to cut a very rough shape with my knife. It doesn't have to be exact at all, as I'll be able to dial it in when it's actually on the Mini. Now that we've got a rough outline, it's time for the first test fit. The first thing I noticed here is that I cut it way too large, so I just took it off and cut it down a bit. And then after we get the shape cut back in again, the next step is to tear it. Handling the piece at this point is really delicate, as once it's torn, it'll be super difficult to get a fingerprint out of it if I accidentally leave one on it. Tearing a cape like this is really quite easy to get an okay result, and really hard to get a great result. You've just got to slowly pull and stress the material until it gradually comes apart. Now I'll put the loincloth back on the Mini and use my sculpting tool to push it down at the top, making it look like it's coming from under the belt and it's naturally being pulled around the belt buckle. I also decided that the loincloth was still a good deal too long, so I tore it again to reduce the length. Once that was done, I tuned the shape even further with my knife, cutting away excess material from the top of the piece, and then pushing the remaining material back down to its original coming from under the belt disposition. I also drafted in some waves into the fabric at this point, before moving on to adding some bullet holes in the cloth to make it look even more excoriatory. This was done just by pushing the sharp end of one of my sculpting tools through the cloth in a few places and making sure the holes stayed nice and open as the green stuff cured. A couple of tweaks to the way the cloth hangs, and I'm off to grab my Wraithbone primer. And here's the boy. If you've ever painted in white, you'll know that the traditional Chaos Black primer here would be a mistake. White paint usually has really poor coverage, so I'd have to do about 30 coats to make it look properly white. That said, I started by painting all of the armour in Ashen Stone speed paint. This will bring the values down across the board, and being a speed paint, it'll automatically settle into all the little cracks and crevices, giving me my shadows directly. Something you've got to be really careful with when using speed paints, or contrast paint related products in general on models with large flat surfaces like Space Marines, is pooling. If I see paint building up where I don't want it to build up, I'll just use my brush to wick it away, and then I should get a nice smooth finish. On to the holsters and pouches now. I'll just lay down a nice simple base coat of Tree Ancient, making sure not to touch any of the speed painted areas. There we go. Now that's all polished off, I'll move on to painting all the metallic areas with my favourite and ever versatile metallic base coat, Death Metal. I'll get the belt, the bolt gun, the Deathwatch pauldron, and a number of other minor fits and fittings, as well as the mechanical gubbins on the backpack. And here he is, all done. Now I'll add the first layer of white highlights to the armour. This was done by mixing a small amount of matte white into uniform grey. Later highlight coats had slightly more white added to them until I had a final layer of matte white added later on. Even after a single highlight, the white armour really starts to pop here. I put it down to the speed paint layer, I think. If we'd had that sort of paint in the early 2000s, I think painting white would be seen as much less of a bugbear these days than it is now. I must apologise here for my head wandering into the shot. I'm experimenting with different camera setups, and I've not quite got it right yet. Anyway, next step is to add the base coat for all the red areas, so I've got a bit of colour on the model. Using Basilisk Red, I base coated the tabard before moving on to the helmet mohawk and the bolt gun's receiver cladding. After hitting the straps on his scabbard with the red as well, it's time to move on to the next layer of highlights on the armour. Even more matte white was added to the white mix here, and I went over all of the armour once again, covering slightly less area than last time. It's quite labour intensive painting this way, but the result is very much worth it in my view. Making sure that I've not missed any spots, I just take a moment here to neaten up the shadows in the grooves on top of the backpack. No mistake is too bad to fix when it comes to painting minis. The most important thing is that one is pushing oneself. Next on the agenda is adding my customary chainmail highlight to all the metal areas. No gold this time, so everything just gets the silver recipe. I always enjoy doing the pauldrons on these Deathwatch Marines. Seeing the lettering immediately pop out of the model when I pass my brush over it is very satisfying. Now that the metal highlight's done, the paint job's really starting to come together. The next step is adding highlights to the reds. I added a layer of dragon red in short, sharp strokes perpendicular to the creases in the cloth, as is tradition. After that, I moved on to the mohawk and the cladding on the bolt gun as well, making sure to leave that nice dark line between the plates. Onto the leather next. I added a layer of the appropriately named leather brown. I did sort of a wide edge highlight here, but I went out of my way to make it look as uneven and as jagged as possible. I'm trying to simulate the leather having been battered and worn over time, and maybe fraying a little bit at the edges. Lastly, I'll add some cracks and creases in Tomb King tan, crisscrossing the leather with thin lines. I think this sells the battered leather look pretty well. The final step of painting is sponging on his chips and dents, using an almost dry sponge to create a random speckling effect. And there's the final paint job for the Excoriator. Only the flag left now. Hold on to your hats, folks. We're assembling a miniature on Diva Wargames with actual glue. Truly revolutionary technology. Now that the pole's glued in, I figure out a good length and cut the rod with my pliers. When that's done and the cut's smoothed, I'll just glue the ferrule in place and the flag is assembled. I'm not going to show the whole painting process for the flag here, but it's just done with the usual method for cloth. I painted the rim and the top a yellow, as that's the heraldic colour of the Imperial Fists, the chapter this squad descends from. I figure out a good angle for the flag by registering it in the tiles on the base, and then glue just the hand in place. Once that's fully dry, I'll glue the flag in place too, both to the base and the hand. And that's a wrap on the final assembly. The Excoriator marks the halfway point for the squad, just 3 more to go. Maybe I'll do a little hero mode battle report when they're done. For now though, let's roll those beauty shots. I'm quite proud of the pose that I've done on the Excoriator. It took a long time in Blender to get it looking natural, but I hit the mark pretty well. The old school bolter was absolutely the right choice as well, and along with the banner, it evokes that heroic last stand motif that Marines are so well known for. I wasn't sure about the yellow border on the flag either, but it's come out well, and it gives me hope for the Ultramarines banner that I'm going to have to do for the next squad in a few weeks. It's time now to hand you over to post-project me to reflect on what I can learn for the next one. Thanks for sticking around and watching this far in. You clearly like the video, so make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell and do all the YouTubery things. But yeah, in terms of the project, broadly speaking, it went pretty well. But I did overcook the chipping a bit, though, I think. I think that mostly comes down to a little bit of laziness on my part. I kind of just bodged together a little like sponge tool thing that I was using, which was fine. It was just way too big for what I was trying to do. So I like, particularly on the breastplate, like I went boop, and then suddenly like there's a million chips, and I was like, oh. So I think doing it properly, getting some tweezers and a tiny piece of sponge next time would fix that problem quite significantly. The other bit was the loincloth. The loincloth kind of came out pretty well. It reads as cloth as far as it goes. It could read more as cloth if I did the bullet holes a bit better, because if you look very closely, let me go, like that bullet hole in the middle in particular, and the top left from your perspective, it's got a little bit of green stuff near the top there, which kind of makes it look like rubber rather than cloth, but it is what it is. Right, well, I guess I'll see you all next week then. We're coming back with the Executioner Axes Akimbo next week, so that'll be fun. Okay, well, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.